R. Kelly didn't rise quietly. He rose too fast, with too much power and too little oversight. Born in Chicago, Kelly came from poverty, instability, and limited education. Music wasn't a hobby, it was an escape route. And unlike many artists, his talent wasn't subtle. He could write, he could produce, he could perform, he could dominate charts. By the early 1990s, R. Kelly wasn't just another R&B singer. He was a hit factory. Songs weren't just successful, they were cultural events. He wrote for others, produced for others, shaped the sound of modern R&B, and here's the first uncomfortable truth. When someone controls value creation, accountability weakens. Kelly didn't need approval, others needed him. That imbalance is where danger begins. As his fame grew, so did his control over environments. Studios, entourages, young aspiring artists, gatekeepers who wanted access. Power didn't arrive suddenly, it accumulated quietly, and nobody questioned it because success was loud. By the mid-1990s, whispers had already begun. Not headlines, whispers, stories about inappropriate behavior, about underage girls, about controlling dynamics. But whispers don't matter in industries built on profit, especially when the artist keeps delivering hits. And R. Kelly kept delivering. This is where the system failed, early and decisively, because instead of investigation there was denial. Instead of intervention there was rationalization. Instead of protection there was silence. Why? Because acknowledging the truth would mean stopping the machine, and the machine was making too much money. Kelly's public image remained carefully crafted. Spiritual themes, redemption narratives, religious symbolism, emotional vulnerability, songs about pain, salvation, and struggle created a paradox. A man accused privately of harm was celebrated publicly as a voice of healing. That contradiction wasn't accidental. It was useful. It blurred reality. And here's the part people still avoid. Abuse rarely hides in darkness. It hides behind credibility. Kelly surrounded himself with enablers, not villains but people who benefited, managers who deflected associates, who stayed silent parents who trusted odd opportunity over instinct executives who avoided knowing too much. Access was framed as mentorship. Control was framed as guidance. Isolation was framed as protection. Classic patterns ignored because the perpetrator was powerful. And the victims, they weren't faceless. They were present. They were visible, they were dismissed, because believing them would cost too much. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, allegations escalated. Evidence existed, warnings were public, but consequences didn't follow. Why? Because the industry doesn't punish danger. It punishes risk to reputation. As long as fans defended him, as long as hits charted, as long as money flowed, R. Kelly wasn't a problem. He was an asset. This is where the rise becomes toxic. Kelly's power wasn't just fame. It was control without challenge. He dictated environments, he dictated narratives, he dictated silence, and the longer this continued, the more normalized it became. People adjusted, excuses hardened, boundaries disappeared. By the time public scrutiny intensified years later, the damage wasn't just individual, it was systemic. Because this wasn't one man acting alone, it was an ecosystem that chose comfort over courage. For years, R. Kelly survived on one thing more powerful than talent: disbelief. Not because the allegations were weak, but because the consequences of believing them were inconvenient. That protection didn't collapse overnight. It eroded slowly as patterns became impossible to ignore. The warnings that were already there. By the early 2000s, allegations weren't rumors anymore. They were documented, recorded, repeated. Legal cases surfaced, evidence circulated, public concern rose, and still, nothing meaningful happened. Why? Because the conversation stayed fragmented. Each accusation was treated as isolated. Each victim was questioned individually. Each incident was framed as controversy, not pattern. That fragmentation mattered, because abuse only survives when it's treated as coincidence instead of structure. Kelly's defense didn't need to prove innocence. It only needed to delay accountability, and delay worked. For years. The role of fame as a weapon. Kelly's fame wasn't just protection, it was leverage. He controlled access to opportunity, to careers, to validation. Young people around him were told the same lie in different forms. This is how the industry works. You're lucky to be here. No one will believe you. You'll ruin everything. And too often they were right, because when survivors spoke, they were dismissed, mocked, and legally pressured, socially isolated. The cost of speaking was high. The cost of silence was invisible until it wasn't. The breaking point, when pattern became public. What finally changed wasn't one court case, it was exposure of the system itself. Survivors spoke together, journalists connected timelines, behavior stopped being framed as rumor and started being shown as method, control, isolation, manipulation, intimidation. The narrative shifted from "did this happen?" to "how is this allowed to continue for so long?" That question terrified the industry because the answer implicated more than one man. Criminal accountability. Once federal investigations began, the frame changed completely. This was no longer about celebrity scandal. It was about trafficking, coercion, exploitation, long-term abuse enabled by power. In court, patterns mattered, testimonies aligned, behavior repeated, and this time, fame didn't confuse the issue, it clarified it. R. Kelly was convicted, sentenced, removed from the power structures that once protected him. That outcome mattered, but not for the reason people think. Justice didn't come because the truth was new, it came because ignoring it became more expensive than acknowledging it. The industry's convenient amnesia. After the conviction, something familiar happened. People distanced themselves, executives claimed ignorance, collaborators went silent. Suddenly no one remembered enabling anything. This is the final layer of the story, and the most revealing: systems rarely apologize, they simply move on. The same infrastructure that once amplified Kelly's power rebranded itself as shocked. That wasn't accountability, that was self-preservation. What this story is really about, the fall of R. Kelly, is not just about a criminal finally facing consequences, it's about how talent can be used as cover, how fame distorts credibility, how institutions protect revenue, not people, how silence becomes policy. Kelly didn't operate in a vacuum. He operated in a system that rewarded output and ignored harm, and that system only stopped when it was forced to. The uncomfortable truth: removing one offender doesn't fix the conditions that allowed him to thrive. Until power is checked early, until access is monitored, until victims are believed before it's convenient, the cycle repeats, with a different name. Final reality R. Kelly's music once dominated culture. His power once felt untouchable. His influence once silenced victims. Today, he no longer controls the narrative, but the question remains: how many others were protected because speaking up cost too much? That question is the real legacy of this rise and fall. If this story made you angry, it should. If you want more investigative rise and fall stories that expose how power shields abuse until it's too late, subscribe, like, comment enough. Because the most dangerous crimes aren't hidden, they're tolerated.